Welcome back. This is the Catholic Lady, and we're reading Great Line of God by Taylor Caldwell. We're at chapter 36 of part 3 of the book, and this is the ministry of St. Paul to the Gentiles. Shabuah bin Abraham had died while in the deserts of Arabia. Rabban Gamaliel had died before his return, and so had the noble Roman lady Clodia Flavius. David ben Shabuah was now rich and elderly man, as judicious and moderate as always. The sons of Shabuah, Simon and Joseph, had embraced the new sect, but with a sturdy earthiness which Saul respected and understood. However, they did not embrace him, for they remembered his passionate nature, and how he seemed to be more passionate and dogmatic than before. And did they not have trials of their own? And did they not, now in their old age, desire peace and the leisure to contemplate the Messiah and perform their religious duties? Their purses were open to their fellow Nazarenes who were in distress. They believed, not with wild exultation, but with common sense. Their souls were muscular without incoherence. They were not enamored of Saul, their nephew, nor did they like his appearance at their houses in the rough garb he preferred, not in emulation of humility, but because he disdained luxury. Therefore, there was left to Saul of the house of Shabuah ben Abraham only his sister Sephora, whose husband had sickened and died but a few weeks ago. "We are a house of mourning," the lovely Sephora said, weeping. "But those we loved died in the knowledge of the Messiah, and they now rest in his bosom." Her children were gentle young things of no particular intellect, except for Amos ben Ezekiel, who had been raised from the dead by the Messiah. And it was to this young man, now 19 years of age, but still unmarried, that Saul turned in his distress. Amos was of a kind of adamantine spirit, quiet in speech, determined in action, just, reverent, devoted, and patrician. Once decided upon a way, he could not be moved from it. He listened to Saul's impassioned diatribes against his fellow Jews, both Nazarene and unbeliever, with calm detachment. With something of his grandfather, David's objective amusement, which he did not display, however, he understood exactly why Saul had been rejected. But no more than Saul did he know what the older man must do. "God will enlighten you concerning his will," said Amos, trying to gentle that most ungentle man. To which Saul replied, "I have been seeking his will since I was born, and he has still not informed me. Am I to waste my life among fools or hostile men who will not listen?" "He will tell you," said Amos. Saul was about to burst out in imprecations when he saw Amos's golden eyes, shining like coins and radiant, and it came to him in wonderment that Amos's words had suddenly struck on his hot heart like a cool cataract of healing water, and he said, "You are only a youth, with hardly a beard, and I am your uncle, and I know the world and have had a revelation. Yet something mysterious tells me that you have spoken words of wisdom, and I have sinned in my impatience." Amos sighed. His uncle had always been excessive in emotion, though paradoxically he was a man embedded in reality. Was his fault that an inability to endure fools gladly, or at least suffer their existence? Was it his fault that an inability to endure fools gladly, or at least suffer their existence? All men were not called to arduous service. Why did Saul believe they were? He, Amos, had his own plans, which he did not divulge to Saul. Saul's encounters with Simon Peter had not been the happiest of events. Simon Peter, a brawny fisherman, was not of Saul's subtle and colorful mind. He was as stubborn as Saul and frequently as obdurate, and often their voices had risen to acrimonious heights. Peter had explained his own vision that in the sight of the Lord there were no common men, nor unclean, and that he must not reject those among the Gentiles who came to him for learning and teaching and baptism. Saul had said with scorn, "But how obvious that is! Once I too despised the Gentile and avoided him as an infidel and heathen. But now I know, not through a vision such as you have had, but with my intelligence, that God is the Father of all men. I did not need a vision." This offended Peter. Had Saul seen the Messiah in the flesh? Had he walked with him in the dust? Had he witnessed his crucifixion? Had the Messiah imparted to him wondrous things over many days? John had said, and truly, that if all that the Messiah had said and done, it would fill many books. Saul claimed to have seen the Messiah on the desert, and Peter did not doubt this for an instant. But first he had persecuted the followers of the Messiah as no Roman would persecute them. Who had slept with the Messiah and broken bread with him but Simon Peter? Had not he, Peter, washed the feet of the Messiah? Had not he walked with him for 40 days after he had risen from the tomb? Yet this Saul of Tarshish, this Pharisee, this man of Greek and Roman knowledge and worldly ways, this man of haughty intellect, appeared to believe that he had more understanding of the Messiah than those who had dwelt with him. It was very vexatious. Through Peter, Saul had also met the umbrageous brothers John and James ben Zebedee. They, like Peter, were industrious men acquainted with labor and toil, and somewhat younger, though all were young. However, they were more of Saul's own spirit, fiery, sometimes inclined to excesses of speech and gesture, unyielding and full of temper. Peter considered Saul's anger against the docility of many of the Nazarenes sinful, and urged him to look upon those who labored as diligently as ever, or more, and did not sit in the temple perilous in slothful attitudes, with upturned and useless palms, not overly clean. He also told Saul that a man could not entirely blame the Jews for not accepting his teachings, because they feared and distrusted him. "Are we not all imperfect men?" Peter asked him. "Are we not to put on perfection?" demanded Saul. Peter sighed. He was a man of quiet humor. "We can but try," he said, a remark which Saul thought frivolous. John and James listened to this with emotion racing across their darkly active faces, and Saul, to his pleasure, saw that they agreed with him and not with Peter. However, they also agreed with Peter that before a Gentile could become a Nazarene, he must first become a Jew, be circumcised, and learn all the sacred scriptures. How else could he understand the Messiah, who had been prophesied through the ages and the signs of his coming? John said, "When we were in Samaria, and the people therein rejected our Lord, and would not hearken to him, I implored him to call down fire on the city and destroy it." "And what did the Lord reply?" asked Saul. Peter's large brown eyes glinted again with humor. "The Lord rebuked John," he said in a tone which implied that the rebuke had not been gentle. John flushed and pulled his cloak closer about his shoulders. James lifted his head in a most vigorous movement. It was obvious that they still believed that cities and nations which rejected the Lord deserved hellfire. For some obscure reason, this annoyed Saul. One should feel sorrow for the cities and the nations, and seek to enlighten them, but certainly not to devour them in flames. That was hardly a good method of persuasion. Their fellow Jews did not reject Peter and John and James, with deaf contempt, but granted them the courtesy of listening to them, and thus they made many converts to the new sect. Moreover, they rebuked the docile Nazarenes, who would not work but simply awaited the imminent arrival of the Messiah. "Who knows but what hour he comes?" asked Peter. "Let him not find us idle, but engaged in honest toil and in prayer." And many were ashamed and resumed their labor. This baffled Saul. He was rejected, but the other apostles were given respectful attention. They even made converts among the Romans and the Greeks. But he had no offerings to give the Lord, no flowers to lay on his altar. It came to him slowly and disastrously, and with the exception of a few now, of his own house, no one spoke to him. All shunned him and averted their eyes, or stood at a distance, silently derisive, that even the priests in the temple had nothing to say to him. No, not even during the high holy days. Peter had left Jerusalem, and James and John had gone far away, and no Jew, Orthodox or Nazarene, recognized his existence. That's the end of chapter 36. Join us soon for chapter 37. Thank you.